Good morning. Today is the 24th day of Kislev. Tonight, here in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel, it's actually in about an hour. We start Hanukkah, and we're going to be looking at the fifth reading of Parashat Vayeishev. The fifth reading is very short, and it tells us what happened to Joseph once he reaches Egypt. And remember that the whole story was that Joseph began by dreaming that he's going to be a leader. And that's exactly what happens. Sometimes, and this is, by the way, a very important lesson, which we didn't write about in Wonders, but I want to stress, if you're not in the right place, you're not appreciated. And I don't mean that you're not appreciated by other people, but when you're not in the right place, you can't perform your mission in life. It's very essential for everyone to know exactly what their mission is and whether they can perform it in a certain place. Sometimes people get really bogged down and they get very frustrated because they're not in the right place. And it takes a lot of effort and thought to figure out what my talents are, where will they best be served. In this respect, what happened to Joseph was that until then, he was in the land of Canaan. He was with his father, under his father's tutelage and his training in Torah and in other areas, but he wasn't able to use his potential. And now he comes down to Egypt. And Egypt, you have to remember, is the United States of the ancient world. It is basically the biggest superpower. There's another superpower that's brewing to the east of Egypt, but it's going to take a few more centuries until it's developed. In fact, it's going to take about another 1,000 years for it to really develop, and that is Babylon. Babylon, and then Persia, and then Medians. But Egypt is the superpower in the time of the patriarchs. Joseph finds himself there, and he's taken immediately, he's sold to a very high-ranking Egyptian official. This is an amazing turn of events because he's not just with anyone. He wasn't sold as a slave to work in some mill. He was taken by one of these high-ranking officials to be his secretary, basically, to organize his entire house. And that's exactly what happens. And right away, the second verse tells us that God was with Joseph. Vayhi ish matzliach. He was a very successful man. And in fact, there's two words in Hebrew that are synonymous, even though they don't sound very synonymous, but they're always translated one for the other, explained one as the other. To be successful is to be intellectual. It's almost the same word in Torah, these two things. Sorry, I'm having trouble here. Just a second. Just a moment. I hope we're back. Okay, I think
Yes.
We're back now.
Yes.
And he is intellectual. What does he do? He becomes a manager. And as a manager, Joseph actually develops what we call business management. It's how you run a business. What do you do? And there's an amazing verse here that in Wonders we put it up. I don't know if I sent you the Wonders, but it says like this. And it was from the time that Potiphar appointed Joseph. Sorry, lost it for a second. Appointed Joseph over his house and all that he owned, that God blessed the house of the Egyptian because of Joseph. Because of Joseph's relationship with God, God blesses the Egyptian. By the way, this is, I don't like saying these things because these are things that are more internal, but we see it throughout history. You cannot run away from it. It's not like something that is so difficult to see. But wherever the Jewish people have been accepted during their exile, have been prosperous, those places have been prosperous and successful. And clearly, without question, the United States is the latest iteration of that process. That wherever they're accepted, that country becomes a superpower. So, Joseph's working for him. And the amazing thing is that this verse that we just said contains a blueprint for how he ran the business, how he ran this Egyptian's house. Where do we see it? We see it in the word that we translated from the time. Vayhi me'az, me'az. It's spelled mem aleph zayin. This word me'az is an acronym. And it's an acronym for three things that define every single business. We call them involvement, quality, and flow. Involvement in Hebrew is me'uravut. Quality is what we call eichut, and flow is zrima. The acronym of these three words is me'az. This is not the only verse in which this word appears, seemingly a little bit out of context, because the Torah doesn't use this word very much, me'az. It does mean from when, from the time of, but it's a little bit strange to use this word. It feels a little bit out of place. So vayhi me'az, it's a very rare word. Another place that this verse appears is in the creation. There is a verse in Proverbs 8:22 that reads, God created me as the beginning of his way. The Torah here is in Proverbs talking about itself. It's saying, God created me as the beginning of his way, the most primal of his works from the outset of time. And the last word of this verse is also me'az. From the outset of time, me'az is the same word. What is it saying? It's saying that all of God's work is also, God runs his business, which is this world, also based on these three principles of, again, involvement, quality, and flow. Now, we don't have very much time here, so I'm only going to send you to it. If you go on our website, internet.org, and you search for the dynamic corporation, you'll find a pamphlet that was always meant to be a book, but it didn't turn out as a book yet. And it discusses in length why these three principles are the most important in running any kind of corporation. So let's say it like this. The word me'az appears only 3 times in the Pentateuch, suggesting a correspondence between those appearances and the individual principles of involvement, quality, and flow. The first 2 principles can be said to correspond to the 2 appearances of me'az, this word, in the book of Exodus. Its first appearance is in the context of Moses' hesitation to accept the responsibility of redeeming Israel from Egypt. And what do you see there? He says, I am not a man of words, neither was I yesterday or the day before, or for as long as you have been speaking with your servant. So it says Moses, from when you have been speaking is again this word, me'az. So Moses' attempt to defer responsibility, which certainly did not stem from indifference to his fellow Jews' plight, can be seen as reflective of his wish not to actively interfere in the divine enterprise. His overt concern was that involving himself in the process of redemption might encourage an element of self-interest, a concern which God rejected. The second appearance of the word me'az relates to the 7th plague visited upon the Egyptians, that of hail. The hail was very heavy, fire flashing in the midst of the hail, such as had not fallen on the land of Egypt since it had become a nation. So here, since it had become, is the same word. So here it's about quality. Before we had involvement, right? Moses is deferring his involvement. He doesn't want to get involved. That's the me'oravut, the mem of me'az. Now we have the aleph, which is the quality. It's a special quality. The hail that happened here is a special product. God has never given a product like this in the world. Finally, we have our verse that we just talked about, the principle of flow, zrima, the zayin in me'az. And here, what is it saying to us about Joseph? And it was from the time that Potiphar appointed Joseph over his house and all that he owned, that God blessed the house of the Egyptian because of Joseph. Here we see clearly the concept of flow. What Joseph was involved in, his involvement was to make sure that everything flowed properly in this Egyptian's house. And later we see that that's exactly what he does later on. Joseph is about flow. Now this also connects to Joseph being foundation, yesod, right? Because yesod, we talked about this, it's a sexual energy, it's the procreative energy, it's also connected to flow. Joseph's genius is in knowing to do things in the right order. That is the highest rectification of the foundation, and that's what makes him into a tzaddik. And we'll see as we move on with the story that that's exactly what he does. He orders things, he puts them in the right flow when it comes to in the Egyptian's house and Potiphar's house, later in the jail also. He makes certain that things flow. And finally, when he comes before Pharaoh, he makes the country, the flow of the materials in the country, what today we would call a supply chain, work the right way, so that whatever was grown during the years of plenty was stored correctly, was used correctly, and was available later for the time of the famine that would come after that. Thank you for joining. I'm sorry for it being a little messed up, a little confused today, but I'm in the middle of getting from one place to another on my way home. So thanks for joining.
What is the template
I hope to
called?
see everyone tomorrow. It should be more easy. I'm sorry, I can't take any questions. I have to
What was
get
the
out.
template called? What's the template?